historic, I'd say, the least, to really now towards the implementation phase of new policies, programs, and in particular, some of the stimulus money that we have before us. So in all, the DNR received a total investment of $130 million of state stimulus funds, primarily focused on three major areas: wildfire mitigation and recovery, public lands and outdoor recreation, and water plan implementation. I want to just highlight to let you all know what the stimulus funding includes. So it includes a total investment of $65 million for wildfire mitigation and watershed restoration. It includes $17.5 million for wildfire. That's going to be a new program that's going to be housed within the DNR, within actually the executive director's office, from what we're handling. And then $13.5 million to our partners in the Colorado State Forest Service programs to help implement their furworm program and the Healthy Forest and Vibrant Communities Fund. And also we have a business loan program. So I think many of you know, like a timber harvester, for example, can cost $700,000 to $800,000. So we think there needs to be a robust timber industry too that will also help our forest health challenges moving forward. We also saw $34 million to CDCB's watershed restoration grant program. This is absolutely critical. I think everyone realizes that wildfires are scary, to say the least. You can look back at last season, and 3 of our state's largest wildfires occurred last year. You look at some new numbers right now that reflect 1 in 2 Coloradans live within the wildland urban interface. And then, we're going to, I think many of us are going to be talking about drought, and this was a historic drought that we're in right now. But a lot of people don't realize after fires, we all know here at the CWCB board, but, the water quality and quantity are immense. But I really want to just share with you too, the seriousness of what happens. Take a look online right now at the Denver Post. Up in the Poudre Canyon, we had some very tragic events happen last night. People are lost right now, homes swept down ravines. And so the work that Watershed Restoration Grant Program can really help in these situations. Gail, looking over, your neck of the woods, mine like Canyon. I was at the Grizzly Creek fire last year, and you have slide after slide. So I really, Becky, want to thank you and your team for all the hard work that you do, especially, after fires, because it is serious. And I think people really need to recognize the hard work and dedication and everything that the CWCB brings to the scene after these fire events to protect people. Switching gears to another stimulus component, we had $45 million that was dedicated towards public lands and outdoor recreation investments. That included $34 million in capacity expansion and infrastructure development for our state parks, $7 million split between parks and operation and wildlife purposes, $1 million for CPW's new outdoor equity grant program, and then last but not least, $3 million that was split between Colorado Avalanche Information Center and DOLA's Search and Rescue grant program. Search and rescue, we see about 4,000 search and rescue calls a year, and there's about 2,600 volunteer professionals. And we are working really hard to kind of boost up and really understand what search and rescue needs are in the state. On the waterfront, we saw $20 million for water plant implementation. That includes $15 million for the CWCB grants to implement projects that support the water plant, and then $5 million that support the basic roundtables. And so very big, to say the least, this year. And that was just the stimulus side. And then staff changes. Really want to welcome Kelly Romero-Heaney. She is, let's give her a round of applause. Kelly is my new assistant director on water. Kelly previously worked for the city of Steamboat. Get to know Kelly if you don't already know her. She's absolutely wonderful and has a 150-year history of family being in Coloradans. She's really worked on the local level to implement Colorado water plan strategies. Has a really interesting background too, worked in private sector as well. Is actually detailed with the Craig Hot Shots. So she's a fellow wildland firefighter like myself, and and is working really hard too with Megan Holcomb and other folks in the governor's office to organize the drought tour coming up too. So we're really excited to have you on board, Kelly. And then also a change in the organization too. Another rock star that we have that we promoted from our policy analyst position, but Angela Bogue. So I elevated her to also an assistant director position to be the head of climate, forest, and energy. You know, when you look at the Department of Natural Resources, we need to do everything we can do to highlight and really look through a lens of climate change right now. And I've also directed all of our division directors to have a point person on climate. So Angela will have people that she can work with. So it's not just a one-person show, but really kind of a collaboration of what our needs are, and actually, you know, get advice from different division directors and folks within other different divisions within the Department of Natural Resources. And speaking of climate change, we are working really hard on this. A few folks have asked me, you know, are we doing enough? And I just want to highlight what we are doing right now. And I have a little script here. I don't want to miss anything. But reflecting across all of our DNR divisions, the Colorado's Natural Resources climate change is really creating an existing challenge for us. Warming temperatures, our water supply and quality issues, increasing wildfire risk, impacting wildlife and recreation opportunities. So as I mentioned, I elevated Angela Bogue's position, but we also have key critical people that are going to be point people on climate moving forward. I also want to applaud the work of Megan Holcomb for leading the cabinet level drought task force in her work to organize the drought tour next month, or actually it is next month, yeah, like next week. And then in 2018, Colorado signed on to the U.S. Climate Alliance Natural Working Lands Challenge. So Colorado commits to managing natural and working lands to be resilient carbon sinks and to protect the communities, economies, and ecosystems that depend on it. In 2020, the state staff established an interagency natural and working lands task force to advance the programs. So the DNR is very much involved with that. And this is definitely critical that we improve the inventory measures for our natural and working lands in Colorado. And staff are currently working on a technical analysis to partner with the Nature Conservancy to quantify the potential for specific ambitious strategies that we can really tip the needle on looking at greenhouse gas reduction goals by 2050. The DNR were also engaged with stakeholders collaborating on President Biden's administrations on the 30 by 30 initiative and working to understand how Colorado can further employ land conservation strategies that have significant benefits to fighting climate change. Also, our state land board has identified new lands in the state that would be suitable for both solar and wind. And just over this past year, they approved 80 megawatts for wind and 200 megawatts for solar projects. And again, this is on state land board. And then our state wildlife action plan includes climate change vulnerability assessments to specific habitats. And our CPW staff are conducting cutting edge research to understand how climate change affects certain species. And they're exploring what solutions we can move forward. So as the climate warms, it's more important than ever that our investments in forest restoration and wildfire risk mitigation to be strategic. Our shared stewardship that we have agreement, and that was an agreement with the governor and the USDA, really reflects the urgent challenges our forest managers face. The Rocky Mountain Restoration Initiative, that's also a really unique partnership, and they have a couple different landscapes that they're working on right now. That's a great example of shared stewardship that we are also working on too. The DNR has participated in this effort through the Restore grants, as well as investments by CPW and CWCB. Also, the Colorado State Forest Service has incorporated climate change adaptation to their management approaches, and that's part of the 2020 Forest Action Plan that they're moving forward with now. So anyways, we're working really hard, and I'm very optimistic too that as we work within the DNR, we can really look at what specific policies to looking through a water lens, a wildlife lens. We have oil and gas. It's almost like a miniature Department of Interior, everything that we cover in the DNR. But I'll be sure to give you updates on certain policies that we move forward on this. You've heard me talk about WIGs, these wildly important goals. These are performance metrics. I want to give you a snapshot of what these performance metrics will be going forward. These are, looking at Kate, they're somewhat, I can share these, but there may be some tweaks moving forward. But our first WIG is to develop new sustainable funding sources for CPW to achieve the three-part mission to support wildlife, state parks, and outdoor recreation. This is really a continuation of our performance metric that we had last year. So some of the performance measurables is to increase private donations. You all know CPW is an enterprise, so we depend on revenue coming in. They increase private donations from $150,000 to $250,000 in roundup donations, expand revenues by creating solicited campaign programs from $25,000 to $150,000, expand CPW revenues by seeking out market and accept planned giving donations with the goal of identifying 5 legacy donors. Another one is another WIG is to balance conservation and outdoor recreation. This past year, CPW approved 5 of these outdoor regional partnerships, but the goal moving forward is go from 5 to 8 and also increase trail crew hours supported by grants from $112,000 to $120,000, increasing funding for regional partnerships from $640,000 to $750,000. Conducting movement analysis for 5 big game projects and increasing summary reports displaying by game movements from 0 to 5, and then increased promotion of our wildlife habitat program from 0 regional partnerships to 5. So those are big, and Dan, you had a bulk load of our WIGs last year, so thank you, and you're going to be working on some of these moving forward. WIG number 3 is to increase wildfire risk mitigation. And so, as many of you know, the Colorado State Forest Service, they more or less, they're our staff link for our Division of Forestry. So we are working very closely with them on this WIG. So part of that is to have the Colorado Forest Action Plan and Shared Stewardship MOU goal of increasing projects and really critical projects around the state where we can protect lives, property, and critical infrastructure from 0 to 25, increase the number of formal shared stewardship meetings between the State Forest Service and U.S. Forest Service staff from 0 to 4, increase the number of focused outreach efforts in communities that need community wildfire protection plan revisions from 0 to 20. Many communities adopted CWPPs back in like 2005, 2006, 2007, and many communities have just kind of kept those on the shelf. And those are a living, breathing document. As land use decisions change, just like Gail, you mentioned, you're working on a new development in Rifle for Habitat for Humanity. New developments should be reflected in CWPPs because that changes, the wildland urban interface depending on where you live. Our 4th WIG is a continuation of promoting our equity, diversity, and inclusion within the DNR, and that includes implementing best practices in hiring, retention, and community partnerships. With the percentage of DNR job applicants meeting a minimum qualification from 0 to 65, increase DNR's community engagement by holding 4 EDI advisory group meetings with 10 to 20 community organizations, training our 350 managers and supervisors on equitable hiring practices. Those are just a few, but really, I would almost say one of the another exciting WIG that we were originally going to have an internal part of the DNR, which is, again, everything is not totally finalized, but this is very likely going to be a cabinet level performance metric, and that's going to be on water. So this is our WIG 5. The Colorado Water Conservation Board and Department of Natural Resources, in partnership with other state agencies, will complete the 2022 water plan update from 0 to 100% by December 31st, 2022. The plan update will produce recommended actions in 4 strategic areas, including cities, streams, farms, people, and planning. The leading measures to accomplish will be reach 20,000 touch points for water plan engagement and holding over 100 public meetings, develop a plan outlining the set of equity, diversity, and inclusion recommendations. State agencies will collaborate and build consensus on outcome-oriented comprehensive goals to be measured starting January 1st, 2023 in those 4 areas. of streams, cities, farms, people, and planning. So anyways, a lot of heavy lifting. It's really, really exciting. I'll just kind of skim over a few other things. I know Dan will kind of talk probably likely the Keep Colorado Wild Pass. That's revolutionary for CPW, really exciting to have opportunity for people to buy a new state parks pass that will be connected to your vehicle registration fee. So when you're renewing your vehicle, you're going to be automatically enrolled in a huge discount, minimum 50% off discount of what the current price is. We don't know what the current price will be, but we know it will be at least 50% less from what people currently pay now. The regional partnerships has been huge, and we have a lot of work ahead of us to do that. There's a new outdoor equity fund that will be housed within Parks and Wildlife, really looking through a lens of justice, equity, diversity, inclusion. Unlike GOCO, this particular grant that we have $1 million right now, we'll likely have about $3 million moving forward. We'll have the ability to directly fund nonprofits. So GOCO can't do that. A lot of organizations can't do that. This grant can, so we can help support Latino Outdoors, Next 100 Coalition, Blackpackers, just to name a few organizations that would be high on my list. The Colorado Geographic Naming Board is continuing to meet. They're working on specific naming changes. Our state land board, I mentioned earlier, are working through this lens of what lands could be suitable for solar and wind, oil and gas. They're busy with a financial assurance rulemaking process right now, which also includes orphan well. We're looking into how we fund the orphan well program a little bit stronger. And then last but not least, I know Kevin's going to talk about anti-water speculation, so I won't talk about that. You all are aware that Russ George has decided to step down from the chair of IBCC. I just want to thank Russ for his amazing service. He's just absolutely a rock star, and whatever the state has needed, it doesn't matter who the governor was or whatever, Russ is always quick to look for an opportunity to serve. So let's actually give Russ a round of applause. But the process to replace Russ is underway. I'll have updates likely at a future meeting, but just want to let you know that's on my radar screen, but really can't thank Russ George enough for his service. So I know it's very long today, so I apologize, but there's a lot going on.
Lots of good updates to share, and thank you for your leadership and advocacy on all of these critically important issues for the water company. And congratulations to promoted staff and welcome to new staff.
And I'll be here all day. If there's any follow-up questions, I won't be able to be here tomorrow.
Are there any questions for Director Gibbs? All right, seeing none, Director Mitchell.
Thank you, and thank you to Director Gibbs for that very comprehensive update. It helps me on mine, on what I get to focus on. First and foremost, I want to echo Director Gibbs' comments about Russ George, and he's been a friend and a mentor. I don't think it's the last we'll see of him, but our thoughts are with him while he focuses on his priorities at home. And I definitely will miss him and his leadership, and I have already been in constant contact with him. So I think we're going to be okay in the state. Also, I wanted to thank the folks here at Metro State, especially those guys in the back room who are doing amazing things for us. And just with this facility, it's important to recognize that it was designed to be a collaborative space and to really solve heavy problems. And so the Cavia Center was an appropriate place for us to hold our meeting. So thank you, Director Schwartz, for that, that thought and idea. I also want to echo Director Gibbs' thoughts with those affected with the Poudre Canyon slide. We have staff already out focusing on that today. So they are not in the meeting with us because their priorities are out on the ground. And our thoughts are with those people. I'm sure that they are affected by the sites that they are seeing. So thank you for your work on that. Also, I want to remind the board, you all got notice about your board council role has transferred from Amy Beatty. So I want to thank Amy for her service and welcome Jen Melly, who should be a familiar face to all of you all, I hope. And so we appreciate your being willing to step up and be a part of this very amazing group and counsel us in the best way possible. So thank you to Jen. Other staff updates, I'm going to just go there real quick. We've recently made 2 new hires that we're extremely excited about. Steve Rees was hired in June as the watershed flood and protections specialist. He comes to us from the private sector and will take over the managing of the floodplain designation program and also serve as the information officer for the flood section and will assist as needed. That's what we do at the CWCB. We fill in where needed. So outside of other duties as assigned, I believe is what it's called. And so he'll be filling in as needed with the watershed restoration and floodplain mapping program. So also I need to give a shout out because he did graduate from Colorado School of Mines. So, you know, my preference to those people. Also on July 19th, we welcomed Elizabeth Schroeder to the CWCB. Elizabeth has a background in water and equity issues and will be joining us as the new water planning and community outreach specialist. And so we want to welcome Elizabeth. And then the sad news is we lost a couple since probably our last meeting. So Alana moved on and is doing some education work with the Ann Schutz Foundation. And then, can I say this? And then Alex Funks has moved on and is with the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership. So I think this will be his last meeting. Both are a huge loss to us, but we wish them well in their endeavors. And like many before, they'll probably end up back with us at some point. Right, Greg? Dan mentioned a lot with the budget. And so just I want to give a bit of a budget and legislative update. So regarding the budget, which has been a hot topic item, it changes frequently. Anna's going to provide a budget update later today related to the bills that passed in the 2021 legislative session and the impact to the 2021-2022 fiscal year. So we're also in the process right now of working on the fiscal year 2022-23 budget process, and a final budget request based on the governor's priorities will be submitted to the Joint Budget Committee by November 1st. This will include recommendations for some of the remaining federal stimulus funding from the American Rescue Plan Act. We're always keeping our eye on any opportunities that we can to take advantage of any funds that may potentially be able to come our way. Also, the agency budget preparation and review process is confidential until the governor officially submits the budget to the legislature. So we'll provide an update in November at that board meeting with some further details. On to some of the big news. The drought is ever present. We're especially focused on the 21 counties on the Western Slope. You probably saw the governor's drought proclamation and really putting a higher focus on that. And we have already opened up some additional funds that are able to respond to that, but we're always constantly looking for any other opportunities that we have out there. And I know Dan mentioned the drought tour, and my expectation is that we'll be able to gain knowledge from that and really how can the state play an even more prevalent role in how we respond to drought. So I am very much looking forward to that, and thank you for your leadership on making sure that that happens. The leadership on that side of the table that is really pushing hard to help folks on the ground in Colorado. So thank you for that. In the news of drought, you've probably seen coming out starting last week was how are we responding across the Colorado River Basin? And so drought is not just present on the western slope of Colorado, but ever present across all the western states and specifically the Colorado River Basin. And so you probably heard the news about the drought response operations agreement and some of what was going to be happening because of that. It has been an intense process and an intense level of coordination between the upper basin states and the Bureau of Reclamation. The drought response operations agreement, often referred to fondly as DROA, was, you all will remember, was a component of the 2019 drought contingency plan. It calls for increased planning and coordination with the Bureau of Reclamation, especially when projections show that Lake Powell might hit critical levels. Well, we are at that point. The reason that was in the drought contingency plan was because we knew that this was very much a possibility and we wanted to be prepared. And so this isn't unexpected, it's unwelcome, but unexpected, not unexpected. And so it isn't where we wanted to be. We hoped for an amazing winter. We still hope for monsoons, but not on the fire affected areas. But we're really focused on this. So Reclamation's most recently released projections show a 79% chance that Powell will fall below that 35-25 in the next year. So the projections for inflow into Powell have also reduced significantly throughout the summer. And that really is a major trigger for these decisions. And so because of those quickly deteriorating conditions, Reclamation has indicated it is now exercising its authority. I want to make sure it's very clear. The upper basin states did not ask for this to happen. This was an exercising of the authority of the Bureau of Reclamation under the Drought Response Operations Agreement to operate the initial units, including Flaming Gorge, Blue Mesa, and Navajo. Colorado is affected by this. Michelle is also going to be talking about some of this in the Colorado River update agenda. That's why we added, we expected that will take a little bit longer than previously expected. But I wanted to call attention to these developments because as we look forward in Colorado, these hard times is when we need to pull together the most. And this is not something that's enjoyable for us. This wasn't something that, again, like I said, we did not request that this happen, but we know that it's a part of the dire situation that we are in. That being said, this is all happening at the same time that we're thinking about what do these 2026 negotiations look like as we think about the post-2026 operations of Lakes Powell and Meade. This is a rough time to be thinking about that, but it's also the best time to be thinking about that. And knowing that the situation that we are in is a possibility and likely really changes the lens of how we look at our negotiations going forward. That being said, it's also added a sense of urgency that we cannot look away from. We have a responsibility within the state of Colorado to protect all the users, all types of users of the Colorado River water. And that is the intention that I have. I know that's the intention of the administration. And that is an incredibly important and serious role for me. So with that being said, there was not haste. And we went with haste and pulled together some of the technical folks across all 7 basin states. And that meeting, we had a meeting in the last week of June that did that. And appropriately so, it was held in the namesake headwater state of Colorado River, right in this very room. And it was actually a pre-trial of this meeting to see if we could actually do it. And it gave us the confidence to make sure we could hold this meeting here in this great facility. So the focus of that meeting was really to initiate a discussion amongst the technical folks across all the states, focusing on the modeling tools that are going to support our negotiations. This group was and will continue to be working on ensuring the accuracy of the modeling tools and considering a wide range of future hydrologies and acknowledging the extreme variable hydrologic conditions in the basin, much like what we're seeing now. We're particularly interested in how the upper basin components are reflected and then defined within the models. And I will continue to provide updates on the progress. We are going to be continuing to hone in on that technical component and making sure that we hold everyone accountable, that we are using the best science available. We're not willing to look away from mistakes in models and to rush through this, but making sure that with urgency, we are looking at the best science available as we're making these long-range decisions for the people of not only the state of Colorado, but the 40 million people that rely on the Colorado River from here to Mexico. And so this is an incredibly serious time for all of us. And I look forward to updating you all as we move forward in the process. And I also look forward to the state of Colorado pulling together as one state and really making sure that we come together in these difficult times. And as we're looking forward in the negotiations, that is my update. I'm open to any questions, and that's it.
Thank you, Director Mitchell. And we are so fortunate as a state to have your leadership on the incredibly important Colorado River issues. So thank you. Question? Yes.
I just want to second that, and thank you so much. Your leadership is amazing right now, and we need it now more than ever. Colorado needs to be the leader on Colorado River issues, and we are leading right now. And Becky's doing a lot of work behind the scenes that folks may or may not be aware of, but she has tremendous support from all of us in Colorado, but really has built an amazing reputation as being a collaborator and a big thinker, thinking outside the box, and just everything that Colorado needs right now during these challenging times. So thank you so much.
Questions for Director Mitchell? Director Scenic?
Director Mitchell, are there things that we can help you with, assist you with in this whole process? I mean, we want to be supportive, so there are things we can do. Please don't hesitate to reach out.
And I'm going to have asks for you. And right now my ask is that really as this board, I think it's important to recognize that while I do spend much of the time on the phone and much of the time on the ground, a lot of that is happening on an interstate level also. And so I don't like to say I ever get tired, because most of the time I don't, but I do feel like this board is really, we're all extensions of each other. And so as we go out and as we talk to people, I hope that I can hone in my message enough to you that you all can project the message out to the people that you are on the ground with, so that we are one, and that we are all singing from the same song sheet, and that hearing the support from Director Gibbs and the administration and all of you is incredibly important to me. But that also translates out to folks across the state, and so I see you all as an extension of the work that I am doing on the Colorado River and the messaging component of that.
Thank you.
Other questions? And again, welcome to the new CWCB staff, Steve and Elizabeth. And for those of you who have the gall to move on, know that you're forever part of the CWCB family. And we look forward to welcoming you back in the fold at sometime in the not too distant future, hopefully. All right, we do not have an IBCC director report today, so we will move on to 4D, the Agriculture Commissioner, Kate Cooper.
Well, thank you, Dr. Bodie. It's good to see you all and be here with you today. Just like Director Gibbs, we have lots going on at the Department of Agriculture, but of course, that all stems from what farmers and ranchers and folks in the field are living every day. And that will be a broken record to talk about drought, as we've talked a lot about on our Ag Impact Task Force that Megan Holcomb chairs with me. and Director Sakata serves on that as well. Just the reports from the field are pretty profound, especially on the western slope, not just drought, but grasshoppers, a lot of big questions on what to do with herds, how to get hay, if it's more economically feasible to move cattle or move hay, and of course got diesel fuel issues that add into that equation. So just an incredibly complex time for producers and a challenging time. And then of course compounded by wildfires, by smoke, by heat, and a lot of questions about how to move into the future. With that, I do want to give a big shout out to the CWCB and DNR team, who have just done an incredible job. Kelly, on your first 3 weeks, I think, on the job, we've thrown you right into the middle of it all. And I know you can handle that, obviously, but Kelly and Megan in particular, just done an incredible job on planning this drought tour in the Yampa. So really looking forward to being up there and back on the ground, as we did in 2018 in my neck of the woods, which still lands on people's memories of how meaningful it was to have a couple busloads of folks from the state who really showed up and cared about what our lives are like outside of Denver. With that, we have also a lot of stimulus dollars flowing through the department. Just as a reference, our budget's around $57 million. We have $76 million in stimulus money coming through our doors right now. So that's also a sign of the hard work my team put in. We built a recovery team the same month the pandemic started. So that was led by Jordan Beasley, who's actually out on paternity leave right now, coming back next month. But that means we were thinking about how do we recover when we were also thinking about how do we get enough laptops to get everybody home and deal with this outbreak. So just really proud of the work we've done. Just to break down what we've got, $2.5 million for Colorado Proud Ag Marketing. That's been a huge focus of ours, obviously, is market access. $3 million in drought relief. We already got $1 million of those out to the 75 conservation districts around the state. That was a flat $15K per district. And then we're working on how to distribute the rest. 1.8 million is great, but it's also not enough to distribute, widely to everybody who's impacted. So just a lot of conversations about how we most meaningfully get those dollars out the door. We also have $5 million for renewable energy development, including agrivoltaic operations, so stacked renewable and ag systems. Actually did our bill signing out at Jack's Solar Garden in Longmont, which is pretty remarkable, seeing how they're integrating grazing and crop production underneath solar production as well. And that $5 million also goes to soil health. We've got $33.5 million for ag events, the bulk of which is going to the National Western Stock Show, and $5 million of that to the state fair. 2 million of that, those dollars will be to other ag events and county fairs. And we are just at the tail end of figuring out how to get those dollars out the door. No deadlines have been missed. I know folks are wondering how they access these funds. We just want to make sure we get it right and do enough listening to make sure we do this the way it should be done. Then lastly, on the stimulus side, we have a brand new revolving loan fund, which we'll be setting up of $30 million. This is a big deal. We, our vision was one-time grant dollars. The legislature turned that into a shared grant and loan fund. So we've been working with the CWCB team, and many thanks to your staff, Becky, who have helped us think through how we build a loan program and also how we aren't redundant to what CWCB and other entities at the state level do. We won't be direct lending. We won't be operating as a bank. So we look forward to partnering with financial institutions. However, this does leave a lot of flexibility for how we set up the terms, both the terms of the loans and the kinds of projects we fund. So I'm thinking about what we're facing with water in the state and what producers are up against. I think this can be a tool where we can help finance some creative projects and absorb some of the risk for producers who are sticking their neck out and trying something new. So really looking forward to building that. There will be a rulemaking, and certainly encourage anyone interested to join us in that. On our legislative agenda, we had successful leg session as well. We did get a soil health bill passed that was run by an external collaborative of producers and partners. So we now have formal and explicit authority to do a lot of work, all voluntary, all incentive based on soil health. We've been operating under a 5-year agreement with NRCS to implement that, but now it is formal. We also created a new office within the department called the Agricultural Drought and Climate Resilience Office. Really excited about this as we build, as Director Gibbs was mentioning, our capacity to respond to, mitigate, plan for the impacts of climate, which we're living today. In addition, there was another big bill, which we'll be doing rulemaking on, SB 87, Ag Workers Bill of Rights. Lots of rulemaking will be going through Department of Labor, but a fair amount will be coming through us on a couple of key items around hand weeding variances. With that, just a couple of last items on my list. We have some staffing updates. Just hired a deputy communications director and director of community engagement, Bethany Howell, who's down in Del Norte, and she'll be predominantly down in Del Norte and also out across the state. So very excited about that. Also just hired an assistant state veterinarian, Dr. Morgan McCarty, who's out in Rifle, will predominantly be out in Rifle and across the state. And just really glad to be able to bring on these folks who live in rural Colorado and serve rural Colorado. We'll also be hiring for a loan program manager, an ag worker liaison, and for a director of our Drought and Climate Resilience Office. Lastly, on our WIGs, we're continuing a lot of the work we've been doing the last few years, focused on economic and supply chain resilience, farmer and rancher-led stewardship, and supporting the next generation, and have just a ton of incredible work going on across the department to advance those goals. And just a huge shout out to my team at CDA for never letting their foot off the gas pedal throughout the last year and a half, and we're going to do the same looking forward. So that's it for my report today.
Thank you, Director Greenberg. Are there any questions? All right.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I just would like to thank Commissioner Greenberg for a great job she's done over the past year. Again, Department of Ag, used to being out there, so thanks so much. And we all often talked about how do we make sure that waters can keep their farmers, and the best way to do it is make them economically viable. And so thank you for those efforts to do that, and the revolving fund idea and everything, I think will be a great option for them. So thank you.
Dr. Schwartz.
And thank you. And of course, Western Garfield County and Western part of the state is really under such a threat. And we have long time ranchers that are just even questioning their ability to keep cattle, and because of all the streams drying up, and this is the new future. And so the question is it the Climate Resiliency Office? Is that the group that's going to help with communications, outreach, bringing on and helping develop new policies to support the diversification of agriculture, as well as the resilience of agriculture?
Yeah, great question. I think we haven't set up the model, the framework yet. We'll be doing that in the coming months. It's going to be a cross-division effort. Our markets team, for example, is already supporting producers who are looking at switching to less water-intensive crops, and how we open up markets for that. But the Drought and Climate Resilience Office at CDA will be a leading force for research, for technical assistance, for advocacy and policy development. We're not sure exactly what that looks like, but this at least gives us the framework and one person to take the helm and figure out where we go from here.
I look forward to welcoming you.
Dr. Clark.
Director Greenberg, I don't participate that directly in ag, except in my little vegetable garden, but conversation I've heard quite a bit down in our area, Chaffee County, is questions about pollinators. And I'm just curious if you have any sort of initiatives or ongoing studies regarding changes in insect populations, things like that, tie into that whole life cycle and production cycle.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's been a perennial issue for many years, and certainly something that we are concerned about within our pesticides unit. And we do a lot of work on preventing and mitigating impacts to bee colonies with the regulatory authority we have over there and the relationships we have on that side. The soil health work is also a part of that, and the sort of the biodiversity that's inherent in a lot of that work. It's not explicitly targeted toward bee populations, but it's all kind of part of a functioning ecosystem of the farm or ranch. That said, I think there remains a lot of issues with our bee populations countrywide. and is certainly an area where I'd like to be able to focus more through the two programs I mentioned, or perhaps, some other model or research or partnership as well.
Thanks. Any other questions? Thank you again for the great report. All right, moving on to item 4E, our state engineer, Director Ryan, welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, everyone. I have a few comments, a few things to touch on. And first, I would like to mention Russ George, as Director Gibbs and Director Mitchell did. It's important to me to recognize him and say a few things, although we will be seeing him more, so we're looking forward to that. But I just want to mention my personal experience with Russ George. He, to me, is one of those iconic leaders in water in Colorado that we all have our own select group of those, and probably a lot of them are the same for all of us. And he's one of those for me. And what I can say about Russ is that he's one of those people that is known so much for his knowledge and leadership. And I think the greater those skills are in people, they tend to talk to you in a way that they bring you up to their level and talk to you at their level instead of talking down to you at your level. And I say that with a little sensitivity that I still feel it at my age and my position. I'm one of those beginning engineers that still trying to learn the ropes. There's always one more thing that we're trying to figure out, and Russ helps you figure that out. And in so doing and treating you that way, he tends to elevate you and help you advance in your ability to do things. I just have a quick anecdote about Russ that maybe says even more. I remember Hal Simpson, one of my predecessors, and those of you that know Hal Simpson, not a man of much emotion, correct? and I remember I was in the room the day that somebody told Hal that Russ was named the new director of DNR. And the big smile that came across Hal's face, it was the most amazing thing. I've never seen Hal smile like that. And if you know Hal, that probably is more of a testimonial to, not a testimonial, but recognition of Russ than anything else. So I am looking forward to seeing him in whatever capacity we do in the future. I have one very important item to remind you of and close the loop a little bit on. If you all remember the Cucharas number 5 dam in southeastern Colorado, I think Kirk Russell has some updates for you all on a delinquent loan with Two Rivers, but there was another component of Two Rivers in the ownership of a dam that for decades have become more and more dangerous. And Bill McCormick, our dam safety chief, and Scott Cuthbertson, our deputy state engineer, did so much work over the years to manage this, to manage the safety of that dam. And we finally ended up just a few years ago with a judgment from the court that would allow DWR to exercise its authority and go in and make this dam more safe. For all practical purposes, remove the dam, which we did at great cost. And the money used for that came from the Dam Safety Emergency Fund through the CWCB. And we were able to do that, but that left a bill of over $600,000. And not a bill so much, but a cost that came out of the fund. The fund was replenished, but the law did allow us to go back and try to recuperate those funds, which we did. And I'm using that flattering we. It was people like Scott Cuthbertson, Bill McCormick, and really the Attorney General's office, Paul Bennington and his staff. And I could go through a longer list of people, but let's leave it at that. We got word here just a month ago that the remaining payoff amount, $558,000 and change, was paid off and back in the general fund. So thanks to the hard work of DWR staff, but certainly the Attorney General's office and Paul Bennington, that's a lot of money that the state got back. And let's not forget what was going on there was a dam that was unsafe, putting people at risk. And the tipping point was the fire in southeast Colorado that completely changed the flood hydrology to where we all know what happens. Sadly, we heard last night what happens when you have fire conditions and the floods that can occur. So a big success. If anybody wants more details on that, I could certainly provide them. Quick comment about Colorado River activities. And I just really want to say that the state engineer in our office was a little stalled on doing some things for the last year because we simply could not get out and bring people together for important stakeholder meetings. And what I'm talking about is my indication a year and a half ago that we were going to start stakeholder meetings for measurement tools. And we all know what happened there. But we've got the ability to move out. We've got a plan. The reason I'm not giving too much information now, Mike Sullivan, the deputy state engineer, and I would like to work with some of the partner type agencies and entities on the west slope to bring them in. I've found over the years that it just works a whole lot better if you can contact people on the ground and let them know, hey, this is what we're going to be doing in your area. This is how we'd like to work with you on it. So let us finish that up. But I think in the coming days, you'll hear more from our office about how we're going to move ahead on that and maybe what our considerations are for compact compliance rules. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. Director Gibbs told me that, told you all that I would be saying more about Senate Bill 48, the anti-speculation work group that was formed. The legislation directed Director Gibbs to convene a work group, and he did convene a very diverse work group that has done amazing work, in my opinion. And I've had the pleasure, along with Scott Steinbrecher, to co-facilitate that group. Several meetings, a lot of meetings, very substantive. And we've got a report that I would say is nearly done. It needs to be delivered to the Water Resources Review Committee on August 15th. We've made a decision as a work group that we would not deliver advanced copies, drafts of that report to the public or the media, because we really want to respect that the committee for whom the report is being done should be the first to see it before they're dealing with the actions from the public and the media. Although we will, of course, release it as we release it to the Water Resources Review Committee. But it's a well-done report, very comprehensive, and part of the information that's in it is, I think, expressing some fundamental tenets. So while I just said that I'm not going to reveal a lot about the report, I can tell you a couple things. The process, and any of you all could have been listening in to the work group meetings. They're Zoom meetings and they're advertised on the DNR website. But there's been a lot of brainstorming. What kind of laws, what kind of actions can be taken to mitigate, reduce, eliminate what we've called investment water speculation. We have the laws to take care of traditional water speculation. We're demonstrating can and will put the water to beneficial use. But we don't have laws on investment water speculation, turning water rights over for a profit. And so we have a list of about, I believe, 18 to 20 concepts that may have some effect on that. That's what the process we're going through now, how to present those concepts to the committee in the report. But the one thing we've agreed on, I just want to point this out, and we hear these sort of, to make the point, I'm going to say platitudes, but I'll maybe use a better term, fundamental tenets that we have regarding water and water rights in Colorado. So this is right out of the report. I apologize for reading to you, but there are 3 tenets, and one of them says, Coloradans value water for its beneficial use, and it should not be traded as a commodity for profit. The work group had consensus on that. Second one, Coloradans value irrigated lands, safe and reliable drinking water, and the environmental, recreational, and community benefits derived from our water resources. Good agreement on that. That sounds like a good one. Finally, Coloradans value property rights in the beneficial use of water and the protection of them. And I just really need to highlight that. Coloradans value property rights in the beneficial use of water. That's what makes a lot of this discussion difficult when it comes to investment water speculation. How are we maybe impacting that personal property right that people have when they have a water right? With that lead in, I'm just going to leave you hanging and say, stand by. The report will be coming out, but we just have benefited from a very high quality, diverse group of people. And some opinions are just opposite in a polar opposite sort of way. But that's part of the value that we have from that group. Last thing I'm going to talk about, I had a good reminder from one of our directors that I had talked a year and a half ago about where we stand on our compact. So after all the really complex information that Director Mitchell gave us with the Upper Colorado River Commission, but more at a federal level and things that are going on with the Drought, et cetera, has to do a lot with lake levels and 35-25 and just a lot of information going on. But a year and a half ago, I went before Water Congress and I spoke to other groups. What is our compliance status, for lack of a better term? And maybe more to the point, is compact compliance administration imminent in the Colorado River Basin? It's a great question. I'm going to give you a very similar response to that with maybe some updated data right now, just to address that. And I will maybe again leave you hanging when I'm done. Say we'll be talking about this more as we do some of the stakeholder discussions for measurement rules and other aspects of that. So if you look.
Anywhere.
Is that the same slide for you? Because it's the same slide for me.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay, that's kind of small, but as we look at the probability of need to take action, what does that mean? That means that we are out of compliance with the Colorado River Compact. What is compliance? Just a reminder, what we really focus on, what's clear in the compact, is delivering 75 million acre feet at Lee Ferry total for every running 10 years. So you can see those numbers, that 10-year total in the third column. And of course, we were in some really good years early in the century, and that's declined. We had a really good year in 2011, but we focused on the total. And as you get to 2020, where did we stand? 92 million acre feet delivered over the last 10 years at Lee Ferry. And what that looks like for the last 5 or 6 years, just a little closer. That's the same data I just showed you. But I want you to look at the annual flows at Lee Ferry. Even in the last 6 years, 9.1 million, 9.1, 9.2, 8.4 last year. If you're doing the math, 7.5 million every year would just barely keep us in compliance. So we're way above that. And what that looks like on a graph, that red line being the 75 million number, that's where we've been for about the last 20 years. And so, yeah, we're down close to all that, but that's part of the plan. Now, I want to look into the future. And I shouldn't say look into the future, that sounds like I'm forecasting, but I want to project what is likely to happen. Let's say that. If we look, again, the same numbers for 2017 through 2020 that I just showed you, and deliveries, we stand at 92 million acre feet, almost 93 right now. And that's the actual totals. That comes out of the Upper Colorado River Commission annual report, the 72nd annual report. And then if we look at 21 and 22, what's a good projection? As we look at the Bureau of Reclamation's 24-month study, they call it, from May 2021, that's what we're looking at, 8.38 and 7.63. Now, let me just be clear, those numbers are not exactly what's in the report. I've added 150,000 acre feet to each of those numbers for 2021 and 2022 to account for gains between Glen Canyon and Lee Ferry, natural gains that come from the prior river. That's where we are. So you see 2022, still 7.63 million. We're still at 86 million acre feet. And then as we maybe try to project the most likely, but still somewhat conservative scenario, and I did not update that. As you see in the pink box, I said 7 million acre feet. I should have had 7.48 million acre feet for 2023 to 2025. The reason I had 7 million, that would be the absolute absolute minimum according to the 07 guidelines. But the more likely scenario with the work that Becky is doing and the Upper Commission and the Bureau is doing, it's more likely 7.48 for 23 through 25. And add that 150,000, 7.63 million. So there we stand in 2025, if you can't see that bottom, so 84 million acre feet. We're still well above the 75 million. And if we want to just be careful and acknowledge the Mexico obligation that could put us at 82.5 million acre feet, we're not sure how that works, but even at that, we're above that number. So that was a lot of data, but it was just that. It was data and good solid projections that show even through the year 2025, compact compliance administration is not imminent. What that means to Colorado, it means what it means. That's the data. That does not mean that now we're whistling past the graveyard. We all know what's going on out there. We see the urgency, we see the concern, we see what's going on. But it also means that we don't need compact compliance administration next year, or the following year, or the year after that. It does give us time, again, to watch what's going on with Director Mitchell's, I think I called you Director Mitchell's activities. We watch what's going on with some of our other stakeholder work out in the basin. And it gives us time, as we are right now, for the state engineer's office and the attorney general's office, Lane Leoniak and her staff, as we look at some of these issues related to compact compliance, and we identify them and define them and lay the groundwork for solving them, which would lead into rulemaking. So it gives us time to lay the groundwork and responsible thought to it. That is my quick, I'm out of breath now, discussion about compact compliance. I have one last point to make. We have an important reservoir in the Arkansas River Basin. It's called Clear Creek Reservoir up in Atlantic, Colorado. And I saw the need over the weekend to do some field checking. A lot of you know my son Luke, and he and I were up fishing the inlet to Clear Creek Reservoir. We were field checking the gauging station and just managed to get this view as I look east toward the reservoir. Director Felt, you may be familiar with the area, and I do need to say, I probably need to check in with some of your outfitters, because that is the only rainbow I caught that night. That is my report. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Director Ryan. Director Hawkins, do you have a question?
I do, and thank you, Director Ryan. My question for you is that there's been quite a bit of discussion in my basin about what compact compliance means as we consider the tools that may be developed to address drought in the Colorado River Basin. And I'm wondering if you have thought more about the sort of requests that are coming to better understand what compact administration might look like, so that it can be weighed against some of the other tools or actions that we might take locally or as a state to address the continued aridification in the basin.
Thank you, Director Hawkins. That's a good question. And so I'm going to deviate from my promise that I wouldn't get ahead of things, because it's important to talk about. And when we talk about compact compliance, at one level, we can put it quite simply and say strict priority-based curtailment when directed by Director Mitchell or Commissioner Mitchell and the Colorado River Commission. It's a blunt tool. It's not as informed of a tool, but that's what that would look like. And that's what you've heard me say before, we'd like to avoid. The more precise, thoughtful, equitable, all the adjectives I can add, tool would be through compact compliance administration rules. And Director Hawkins, that's where I start carefully talking about components of that. What would the rules entail? Would they allow a deviation from strict priority curtailment? How would they look at things like, just for example, exempt wells and their impact? What strategies could water users use to manage what obligation they might have to compact compliance? And as I say that, I need to be very careful, because I don't want to get ahead of Director Mitchell, and I don't want to get ahead of the process with other states and let them know that, well, this is what we've decided. So that's why I'm very careful about that. and we'll continue to be careful about that, to put Colorado or help Colorado stay in the best position on this issue. So I'm sorry I danced around your question a little bit, Director Hawkins. Is that helpful?
If I may, Chairman Brody.
Yes.
I would say that is helpful, but would just communicate that I'm continuing to hear that there's a lot of questions about what compact administration might look like and what it might mean. And so I would anticipate that that will come up as you get out in the field this year.
And Director Hawkins, let me just also say that when we're out in the field, I'd like to contact a couple entities, maybe a conservancy district in your area ahead of time and work with them and maybe identify some of those questions. And we will be down in your area personally with stakeholder meetings. I think we can address that in a little more detail.
Thank you. Director Schwartz.
Thank you. Thank you. And again, revisiting that presentation. Just, I think what would be helpful is if you, instead of having static numbers from 2023 to 2025, pushing up against the 2026, where we're going to land in terms of that renegotiation of compact, that providing sort of a range, worst case, best case, applying the rate of diminution of the flows that we've experienced over the last 5-6 years, and looking at what those levels, that delivery might look like, and then take it out another 10 years. And I think that your presentation of, again, a spectrum of where the flows are going to end up would be useful. This was it's informative, but I think that we need to have the not imminent, but we might need to have the imminent scenario and that rate of diminution of flows looking forward, because I think would be a useful tool as we're sitting at this negotiating table for the next, until 2026 when it's final decisions. And what is that magic number going to be? Is it going to be 11 million acre feet? I mean, is it what's the number going to be? So I think I'm sure you're looking at this closely, and what analysis can you support us with? Additional analysis.
Director Schwartz, that's a really helpful question for me because it allows me to put something in the context. And it's, as you were talking about that, you were looking at Director Mitchell as well. And maybe the point I'd like to make is I did this first about 1.5 years ago because I had those questions. What are you doing? Are we going to have compact compliance administration soon? And so for me, not to minimize the importance of it, but that was a little binary. I didn't want to do an analysis other than what is the potential that I need to be out there tomorrow doing rulemaking. And so I answered that question through this data, the analysis of this data that I showed you. But when we get into longer projections that go beyond answering the question, should I be out there tomorrow? I need to leave that to the folks that are really looking long-term at the entire system, not just my intrastate rulemaking concerns. So that was my way of saying, I probably won't do much more on that. I will leave it to the experts because I'm not the expert in that area.
And thank you. And again, I thought your presentation was excellent, but 1.5 years has passed. We have more current data. I think to really have the water community and the state understand what this rate of diminished flows looks like, I would just ask that you might have a little update on the chart.
Thank you. And Director Mitchell and I talk frequently, and we can talk that through some more.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Director Tripp.
Yes, since we're on the subject, I just had another context question. Do you have a prediction of how long a rulemaking process would take based on maybe past rulemakings that your department has done for compliance? Just ballpark estimate.
Yeah, the ballpark estimate is going to be a big ballpark, but just to be clear, this type of rulemaking we would do through the state engineer's rulemaking authority, which is different from APA, so it would probably be a water court process. Involves a lot of stakeholder discussion, filing with water court, and then letting that work through the water court process. So I would say certainly 3 years, if not more.
Well, yes, Director Paul.
Director Ryan, I'm trying to think, I don't want this to be critical at all, but there's a frustration that I do feel on the graph that you showed with the annual and 10-year releases. And I think what that is I can't help but look at this in sort of a economic or financing type of mindset. And, conversations I had with my banker when I was a young businessman or something, and, saying, look, I'm making the payments. Just quit worrying about it, and saying, well, what's the burn rate? Like, where's this money coming from? What's your inflow? What's the profit? What do you have to make this payments? Or are you selling boats and buses in the winter to pay your loan or that kind of thing? And so I did feel like I'd love to see a couple more columns that showed total estimated inflow to Lake Powell, and then what's our fund balance doing, because that, and I think we all know at some level that it's like, yeah, it's not really doing too well, and that what's coming out isn't necessarily logically reflective of what's going in, absent any knowledge of the incredibly complex arrangements that exist. But I think that would also speak to either and support your projections of the time remaining before something could force your hand, or raise more concern. I don't know, but it would just sort of expand that picture. And I don't know if you have that available or not, but I think it's something that we all just would wonder about. It's part of that picture.
Director Feld, I agree with how informative that would be. And I can give you the big picture on long-term compliance and really what's happening hydrologically in the basin. Using your metaphor, obviously, we've been taking more money out of the account than we've been putting in over recent years, because we've watched the balance of that account drop every year when we get our statement.
Yeah.
So no doubt about that. And again, not to be uncaring about the importance of this big picture, but mine is limited data. Again, just to help me understand, give me the confidence that I don't need rules in 2023. And so again, that's something that Director Mitchell and I could talk about, and what bigger picture information can she and the other states give related to that?
Thank you. Sure.
And I'm sure that this is not the last conversation we'll have on this important topic. So thank you for the update. And that was quite the teaser on the anti-speculation report. I'm sure I'll be eager to read it when it comes out middle of next month. So thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Let's move on to item 4F, Division of Parks and Wildlife.
Thank you, Chairwoman Brody. And nice to see everybody in person. I might not want to play poker with. I thought I'd be a poker face, but he at least thought I win that one. So Director Gibbs, Executive Director Gibbs already talked specifically about a bunch of the bills. I don't want to reiterate. I will just briefly though on Keep Colorado Wild, as Director Gibbs discussed, is really it's way more than once in a career, it's really once in a lifetime. It's changed how we're going to fund operationally, not necessarily capitally, but operationally, how we'll fund state parks. That is a really big deal because for my career, which is well past 36 years, parks and wildlife, the issue is how are we going to fund in the future, or how are we going to change some of the funding? And that fundamentally does that. So it will be, as discussed, it would be cheaper to get in, but it will attach to everybody unless you opt out. So we have a lot of rule making. We're going to go back publicly. Normally you would do this on the front end, but you strike while the iron's hot. And so we'll go back and kind of talk to constituencies and see how that will work. What's a good price point? How do we do that? Is that license plate readers as you go into the park? And fundamentally, I don't want to get too far in there, but instead of checking people into a state park with where's your park pass or buy it, the assumption will be you're covered and you'll be okay. And it's going to be kind of maybe a back end enforcement thing. And so there's a lot of work to that. That's just one of, I won't go too far down the bill, but that's just one of the things we're going to be working on the next couple of years. And so as I never afraid of a challenge, but we really need to be in the implementation mode on some of the things that got passed the last year or two, not a bunch of new initiatives, because this is a really heavy lift. It's really going to be important and impactful for the state of Colorado. So again, Executive Director Gibbs talked about an equity fund. We're trying to get that on the ground. We already have funding and it will be available July 1. So I'm encouraging staff to not wait till we create a whole board and create all the bylaws, that there's needs out there now. And so that's something I'm really pushing for and have staff working on. That's just a great thing that will happen and was supported by legislation. We also had a bill that not only funded the wolf working group, and I can talk a little bit about wolves here in a minute, but that funded that and also blocked funds from the sportsman community to not go to that. And so that was a real negotiated settlement bill, and that's a 1-year funding. I hate to break the news to you, but wolves won't be a 1-year thing. I know that'll shock everybody in the room. So lots of work to do there, but we're real thrilled about where we are on that. Search and rescue bill, et cetera, et cetera. I can continue going down. There were a lot of things that impacted us really in the positive from Parks and Wildlife, and appreciate my boss and the governor and legislators work on that. So won't spend too much time. Poudre River, as you well know, pretty dramatic. The good news for us, at least temporarily, is the main surge is below our Poudre River fish hatchery, which barely survived the fire, and it looks like it barely initially survived the flood. It's higher up in the drainage, but at least this surge, it was not in this. We do have staff on site and no power, but we did have to shut down all water intakes at Bellevue, Watson, and down at the lower Poudre. And so I do have staff out on the ground, law enforcement staff, hatchery staff, and aquatic staff. And as there are staff from CWC out there too. So keep them in our thoughts and our prayers as we work through this. This won't be the last. The good news is there's 3 or 4 days of moisture coming, at least on, we hope, and let's hope it comes in slow, steady drizzle. So jump back to Wolf Working Group. We're in the middle of, well, I'll say the early stages, but in the middle of really rolling up our sleeves. We have a couple of work groups. We spent a lot of time setting up those work groups. We have a technical advisory group that's countrywide. We have technical experts from Montana and all across the nation, some from Colorado, but and that is I'm not highlighting that, but that's not a public group. That group is our think tank group, sits in there, and these are the experts that have done and have lived through and thrived in that wolf environment in the West and across the nation, endangered species, management, et cetera, et cetera. And so they're working on that. There's also, that's called the TWIG, or the Technical Advisory Group. And then there's a SAG, which is a stakeholders advisory group, and so there's the technical expert. The stakeholder advisory group is really about, I call the social, economic, political, how does this really work on the ground? Neither of those groups are decision-making, their recommendation to the Parks and Wildlife Commission. And both those groups will talk amongst themselves. Myself and Executive Director Gibbs are members, ex officio members on the stakeholder advisory group, and basically we'll meet once a year until we're done with this, at least from a recommendation. But that realistically is the next year and a half, or maybe as long as 2. I've been watching the papers. There's some real, there's always the issues around wolves. There are people for and against, and we're working very, very hard. And there's no relitigation. We know what our job is, which is to implement Proposition 114. There's good parts of that. There's missteps in there. There's also a lot of rhetoric out there. What I can tell you is myself, my agency, my boss, the governor's office, we're in full implementation mode. And so I wouldn't get too stuck on some of the warring factions out there. So we're working hard and have a robust process to get that done. So now I'll get to the thing about drought, affecting drought. We have everybody obviously in the state, won't be our last time. It's really affecting our aquatic and fishing conditions. We have a fishing condition page that you can go to. We also have a decision tree explains how we make decisions on voluntary, non-voluntary closures, half-day closures, et cetera, et cetera. Encourage you to go look for that. Colorado Parks and Wildlife implemented the only mandatory fishing closure. We started early on the Yampa River downstream of Stagecoach. Really at the end of May, that tells you how bad that was in the spring in the Northwest Colorado. So that's the mandatory. We have a voluntary all day though, not a half day critical on the Colorado River. We have adjusted that from State Bridge to Rifle. It started from Kremling, but we relaxed that a little bit from Kremling to State Bridge. There's also very, very little flow in the Dolores River below McPhee. There's really only large pools, and the riffles it's not moving whatsoever. I'll just expect we have significant macroinvertebrate production will suffer, and that the 3 native fishes, which is round-tailed chub, flannel mouth sucker, and blue-tailed sucker will suffer, if not worse this summer. Same issue on the San Miguel River, Southwest is getting some rain, but it's bad. I don't need to point out to anybody here that doesn't understand that. And with all that, I do want to give out a kudos to Water Resources, CWCB staff, Parks and Wildlife staff for working proactively on the White River to protect that popular sport fishery with a new law. We're in I think 4 of the new 5 and 10. Interesting for me, I did that when I was the area manager there in 2002, which was the first time we ever heard of drought in Northwest Colorado. 2002 was the first time anybody ever talked about drought. And I did a voluntary thing. And so that was a handshake. I've talked about that before. The only way you could do it, there was no legal avenue to move water down. So I went and took the ditch presidents to breakfast and shook hands, and they agreed to let the water pass in the middle of the worst drought ever at the time. And so now it's nice to have a process. And so everybody can weigh in on that, and everybody can understand that. So we really appreciate Water Resources help and CWCB's help on that. So glad to answer any questions. I have a million other things that I could talk about, but I think you're going to want to get to water. I do apologize. I've been a caged up rat for the last 16 months, tired of being in the bunker, which I wasn't very good at. Didn't spend much time in the bunker. But today I have a retirement to go to at my main office and a big employee recognition. So I'm going to step out right after lunch. I will be back, and then I have a Wool Growers meeting this afternoon, so I have to step out for that. And I won't be here tomorrow. I'll have my steady hand, Rob Harris, there, but do get to spend most of the day here. I'm excited about that. Just to reiterate, not reiterate, during COVID, I think the numbers, August 28th, we're gonna have a get together in the middle of Monarch Pass somewhere, some camping trip, but in just the COVID years, we had 59 people retire from our agency. So we'll try and recognize that. That's one of the things you end up doing when you have staff that large. And so we just have, we can't do our job without staff. CWCD, no different, water resources, no difference. And so we're going to try and recognize those people and we had some of those little things. We had drive-by retirements. We had, email things. I've gone to a couple, so not all 59 people will be there, but we're going to clear the deck and try and recognize, people's career. I haven't done the math on 59 times, 30 or 20 or 50 years. We've had people work 47 and 50 years. So anyway, just glad to do that, but I'm going to be absent for an hour or two today doing another one of those. So thanks for your patience with me.
Well, thank you for making the effort to be here today. And I will say Rob Harris has represented your division with distinction in your absence. So thank you, Rob, for being here as well. Are there any questions? Dr. Schwartz?
And thank you. And of course, as we went through COVID, we have this urban flight, and we're all begging in our resort communities for the state to stop promoting Colorado because we have no workers. Our resources are being overrun, and we have no management, sufficient management on the ground. So I just mentioned earlier that it really is finding a way that we can support the demands of our, especially our river resources, and obviously our trails as well. But to the extent that we don't have the infrastructure, we don't have the boat ramps, we don't have the toilets, we're promoting this world-class recreation experience, and the state just doesn't look very good when you're pulling off some muddy ramp, and maybe you'll have a porta potty, but I'm just wanting to say that areas like the Rolling Fork and the Colorado, everybody thinks that they have a paddleboard and they're going to go on the river, and this is this new thing of so using and resources, and I'd love to have you come and talk to the folks in our area about these issues. But I'm hoping it's in your planning. I know you have a lot of demands, but we're all trying to do our best to respond, but it's problematic for us. Just the sheer numbers of people that are coming to the mountains and coming to communities. And anybody's who've been on I-70 on 4th of July weekend, those 12-hour trips back and forth.
Grandfather Burke's advice told you never miss a chance to shut up, and so but I'm going to miss that chance. I'm going to respond to that. Can't disagree. We've had an influx. We also have 6 million residents at 100,000 or 80,000 a year to 100,000 a year new, and 2 million residents. And so that's one of the issues. And it's not just my issue. It's a water issue. It's a recreation issue. It's a wildlife issue. It's a infrastructure issue. So the good news is we have worked hard, and I'm looking at Director Felt on this because he was actually smarter than I was, which is no shock to anybody in the room. Started with Envision Chaffee County on an issue that talked about not just that, but how do we manage our resources. And so we expanded on that about regional partnerships so we can try and balance recreation and conservation. Broader than that, our job is now, we've had support in the governor's office to create working groups around the state to get ahead of that as best we can. Chaffee County was a good example, was ahead of us on that. We're 20 years behind, probably at a minimum, but we're working hard at that. Always dangerous, but I would disagree. I don't believe there is no management, Director Schwartz.
Well, no,
May not, I think you used the word no, but significant was your second word, and that I would agree with. There may not be significant enough management depending on where you're at in the state. That's not just a Colorado Parks and Wildlife issue, and that's not me stepping back. That's a county issue, a city issue, just federal issue, and that's where I think the meeting would be beneficial, because ultimately we're all in this together. And so some of it, again, just recreation, some of it's just use, some of it's, we've had to address that on some of our state wildlife areas, which forever and ever as an agency, which by the way, will celebrate our 125th year next year. For 124 years, we were saying, please, anybody use a state wildlife area for free. You don't have to worry about it. You don't need a pass. Come at your own time. You can camp. Well, a few years ago, we had to decide that's not really effective anymore. We can't take that kind of use and still have a piece of property that's of wildlife value anymore. And I think that's true in working farms and ranches today. That's true on federal ground, true on county ground. So anyway, long story short, glad to have the meeting.
Thank you. And I would say the Arkansas is the model. And
Well, Arkansas is one of the models, and it is very intense, but it's a good working model.
well, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Just,
Dr. Khan?
just to follow up, Director Prenslow, I think we are 20 years behind on some of this management of outdoor recreation impacts, but we're also on the Arkansas, we're 30 years ahead too, in the sense that we created the Arkansas Headwaters Recreation Area and we created the voluntary flow management program that I talked about last month in my report. And that couldn't have happened without visionary leadership over the decades from state parks, the park side of the equation in particular, and now unified, Tom Waters at the park, Josh Nearing at aquatics, Rena Griggs in your hydrology. They're all doing a really great job coordinating with Southeastern and Pueblo to keep that river really viable. And because the river is viable from a flow perspective, and because it is so well managed from a recreation perspective, it has allowed our community to not worry about our most focal recreation point, the Arkansas River, and look more into the backcountry and apply ourselves to those more dispersed challenges that span more land management agencies and 1,000 square miles approximately. So you guys have done an amazing job in our basin, and I would gladly go with you to talk to the folks in Gales Basin about sort of what made it work and what you got to have, or what some of those points can be. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I know we're running a bit behind. Let's go ahead and finish out our director's reports with item 4G, water resource and power development, and then we'll take our morning break after that. And Keith, I see you on the video. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate the format today. Particularly, I've got 3 other meetings today, so I appreciate being able to attend this meeting virtually. My report is in your board material. I'll just hit some of the highlights here on the Water Pollution Control Revolving Fund, which is our wastewater program. We've closed 6 loans to date for about $14.3 million. We also do design and engineering grants that are actually executed as principal forgiveness loans. And so when you include those, we've done 11 loans this year for $15.3 million. That's about on average of what we see on a normal year, probably a little low on the dollar size, but the number of loans is about the same. On the drinking water side, our drinking water revolving fund, we've closed 9 loans to date for about $13.6 million. Again, when we include those design and engineering grants or principal forgiveness loans, that jumps up to 12 loans for approximately $14.1 million. We've had 4 projects that have been submitted for our August board meeting. They are the town of Manassas, town of Minturn, Mount Werner Water and Sanitation District, and the town of Starkville. I've got some details if anybody's interested on any of the particulars on those projects, but the total of those 4 projects is just under $6 million. We continue to work with both CWCB and the Department of Local Affairs on project submissions to the governor's office for potential ARP funds and other stimulus dollars. Want to congratulate Angela Boak for her new position. And I want to thank Angela, particularly Angela and some other folks had shown up at our June board meeting and were kind enough to do a wildfire presentation for our board that I thought was just excellent. She did a great job. So I wanted to publicly thank her for doing that. She's also been a good resource for us as we're looking to build out our forest health and watershed protection program. On looking at our office, we're all back in the office, although it's on a hybrid schedule. So we're about in 3 days a week and out of the office 2 days a week. It's kind of a hybrid schedule, look at until the fall, and then we'll kind of evaluate things at then. We are excited to have our first board meeting in person in about a year and a half. That'll be in August in conjunction with the Colorado Water Congress Summer Conference. So we're excited for that. We've got a couple other board meetings scheduled for the rest of the year. The next one's in October. That's tentatively scheduled in Sterling. We've worked with them on a couple of big projects out there, a wastewater plant that they're currently constructing, as well as their drinking water plant that's been done for a couple of years. So we're hoping to do some project tours out there. And then our December meeting should be in Denver, and it'll probably likely be like this meeting here today on a hybrid schedule, so people can participate both virtually as well as in person. So scared myself. I saw the big screen. I apologize for having my big face on the screen, but anyway, I'll stop there and leave it up if you have any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Well, seeing none, thank you so much, Keith, for joining us today, and good luck with the rest of your meetings today.
Great. Thank you.
All right, we will now go ahead and take our morning break. It's 10:48. So let's come back in 15 minutes if we can, so that we can get back on schedule. Thank you, everyone.
Recording stopped. Recording in progress.
All right, so let's resume with agenda item 5, the expedited temporary loan of water for entry flow use on Big Beaver Creek and White River, Water Division 6. Great. Thank you, Director Brody. This is Kaylee Weiss, CWCD staff. Do you have a PowerPoint? Okay, somebody can start that up. Okay, PowerPoint. We're working on it. Thank you. So I can start while they're bringing that up.
Good.
Oh, that's not. Just a minute.
Oh, because we went out of, yeah.
Sorry. Here you go. All right. Oh, thank you, Viola. Great. All right, Kaylee. Agenda item 5 is an expedited temporary loan of water for interim flow use on Big Beaver Creek and on the White River. So as you all are aware, through that rulemaking we did last year and they finalized it early this year. This is implementation of the new statute and rules for temporary loans for interim flow program. So the statute is under 3783-105, and it provides mechanisms for the temporary loans of water for in-stream flow use on existing in-stream flow regions. And there are 2 mechanisms. There's an expedited loan, which can be used in just a 1 year, which is a quicker turnaround on getting it in place. And then the renewable loans are the 5 years, and you use them 5 years out of 10 years. A little bit more of a involved process to get those in place. So our in-stream flow rules were effective on March 17th this year, and which provided the CWCD, the guidance to implement the new statute. So in May, we started looking at the river was looking not great, and the forecast was not good. They wanted to make sure they could get the water in the river if they needed to by July, mid-July, mid-end of July. So the renewable loan process would have taken at least 6 months. We didn't have that kind of time. So that's what we went forward with the expedited loan. For this one, and this is a release out of Big Beaver Creek Reservoir, which is also known as the K-Free. And this is from Colorado Parks and Wildlife. So it's an interagency cooperation with Parks and Wildlife, CDBCD, and Department of Drought Resources who approve the loan. So the leased water will supplement the existing in-stream flows up to their decreed rates. We didn't go past the decreed rates, didn't need to here. So Big Beaver Creek, we have a 2 CFS, and the White River is 200 CFS. There's 43 stream miles of benefits. And then after the end of the downstream terminus of the in-stream flow reach, the water will be available to other water users. So we've leased 3,000 acre feet of water and can use it from now until the end of 2021. So here's a map of the area. You can see Big Beaver Creek, a little stretch of stream just below the reservoir, and then the water would enter into the White River, so all the way through past Meeker, down to the confluence with the Piceance Creek. So some of the terms, DWR has approved the loan from July 10th was the approval date to December 31st. You're limited to 120 days in any calendar year under the statute. The volume of water here in this case may only be refilled under free river conditions. And Parks and Wildlife is to notify DWR of the releases, they're to measure the releases and provide accounting reports, summarizing the releases made as required by the division office. So quick update, I thought maybe we would do releases by now, but fortunately we haven't needed them. That the river's still up pretty high in Meeker, and we have that
3,000 there in reservoir ready when we need it this year, so probably in August, September.
So staff recommendation today is to ratify the CDBC's director's actions, who has accepted the loan and signed the interagency agreement with CDW. So it's just a ratification process. Thank you. Question, Director Brown?
Unless there are questions, I would move to approve staff recommendation, and thank you for the memo. I thought it was really well done, and the process seems like our rulemaking is working, which is nice to see. So thank you very much.
Okay, staff recommendation on agenda item 5 has been moved by Director Brown and seconded by Director Schwartz. Any other discussion before we go to vote? Okay, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And I'll just note, Director Hawkins indicated that her vote is also an aye. Anyone opposed? Thank you. Thank you. All right, moving on to agenda item 6. Oh, Dan.
Thank you, Gerald. I covered it a little earlier, but I would like to thank the board and leadership through that. We didn't think we would have to use the new law or to be the guinea pigs. And nobody likes to be the guinea pig in drought. And so, I really, again, appreciate the staff and everybody working through this. So a real issue. I hope we don't have to use it, but I'm pretty sure we will this summer, but pray for rain. So thanks for the support.
Thank you, Director Prinzlow. Rob, welcome.
Welcome, thank you. For the record, Rob Beal, CWCD staff. I am presenting agenda item number 6, which is an action item on the uncontested 2021 Midstream Flow Appropriations in Water Divisions 2 and 4. As you recall, on March 10th, the board formed its intent to appropriate ISF water rights on 3 stream segments pursuant to Rule 5D of the rules concerning the Colorado Midstream Flow and Natural Lake Level Program. Notice of the board's action was sent to the ISF subscription mailing list on March 16th. The notice provided all parties with a deadline to file a notice of contest, which was no later than June 1st. No notice of contest were filed in any of the 3 segments today, and staff is requesting final action. Real quickly, the 3 statutory findings staff is requesting the board to make is first, that there is a natural environment that exists. Second, that the natural environment will be preserved by the water available for the appropriation. And third, that no material injury to existing water rights. The necessary information to make these 3 findings were provided in staff's memo this past March, along with the executive summaries and the appendices for each recommendation. Real quickly, the 3 stream reaches staff is requesting final action on today are located in table 1 on the screen, which is identical to what was in the staff memo. They are East Fork, Arkansas, Cow Creek, and Wildcat Creek. As you can remember, the Wild Creek ISF recommendation was brought to the board for consideration in January. Action by the board was delayed until March at the request of the Trapper Crossings Homeowners Association. Staff worked with the council for the Homeowners Association, and the end result is a signed stipulation that was included in staff's memo. And with that, I can provide staff's recommendation. So staff requests that the board make the following determinations and take the following actions on each of the appropriations identified in table 1. The information necessary to support these determinations is contained in staff's memo, the recommendation letters, and documentation submitted by the Bureau of Land Management, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and High Country Conservation Advocates, and in staff's oral and written presentations provided at the March 10th, 2021 meeting. Further, 1, determined pursuant to 3792.123 that for each ISF appropriation identified in table 1, there is a natural environment that can be preserved to a reasonable degree. The recommended water rights are granted. Natural environment will be preserved to a reasonable degree by the water available for the recommended appropriations, and such natural environment can exist without material injury to water rights. Second, pursuant to ISF Rule 5F, established March 10th, 2021 as the appropriation date for these water rights. Third, accept the provisions in the Trappers Crossing Homeowners Association stipulation and agree to include them in any subsequent water applications, filings, and decrees. And finally, request staff to work with the Attorney General's office to file water applications by the end of the year. With that, I can take any questions.
Are there any questions or Rob on this recommendation? Director Anderson.
If there's no questions, I would move to for approval of agenda item 6.
So approval on staff recommendation on agenda item 6 has been moved by Director Anderson and seconded by Director Brown. Is there any further deliberation by the board before we go to vote? Director Sakata.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Rob, on the stipulations for the, please forgive my ignorance on this question, but is the HOA only restricted to new domestic wells or any wells?
I think it's any wells under their decree augmentation plan that they had from 2000.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, seeing no further comment, all those in favor of approval of staff recommendation on agenda item 6, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And Director Hawkins indicated that she is also an aye. Are there any opposed or abstentions? All right, seeing none, that item is approved. Thank you.
Thanks. For the record, once again, Rob Gill, CWC staff. This is agenda item number 7. This is an update on the contested 2021 stream flow appropriation on Rincon-Lavaca Creek. This is an informational item only. No formal action is being requested by the board today. Just to give you a little background, at the January 25th meeting, the board formed its intent to appropriate ISF water rights on 5 stream segments, 4 of which were uncontested. The only one that was contested was Rincon-Lavaca. Southwestern Water Conservation District filed a notice of contested appropriation on April 30th. And this was the sole notice of contest that the CWCB received. So CWCB staff, along with counsel from the AG's office, met several times with Southwestern and Colorado Parks and Wildlife, who was the recommending entity in this matter, to see if resolution could be achieved before the hearing process had to play out. So I'm happy to report that all parties agreed upon and signed stipulation in the past few days. Subsequently, Southwestern filed a withdrawal of its notice to contest, which precipitated staff filing an unopposed motion to vacate proceedings in front of the hearing officer. So the hearing officer has approved those. And all this transpired very quickly within the last few days. That's why we didn't ask you to take action today. We wanted to have enough time to fully prepare you for that. So at the September board meeting, there will be no hearing, but staff will be asking the board to take final action on the Rincon-Lavaca Creek stream flow. So that's my update. I can answer any questions. Sorry.
Thank you for the update and for doing a great job as you and the Attorney General's office always do in trying to resolve these issues and come up with an accommodation that meets everyone's needs. All right, moving on to agenda item 8, Kirk. I understand you have an update on financial matters.
Good morning, Kirk Russell, Finance Section Chief. A reminder, the CWCD and the state operates on a fiscal year that ended June 30th. And so this report that I traditionally provide the board typically has more information in it. So we are just at the start of the fiscal year. And I always struggle each year in July to look backwards or look forward. And so I provided you the look forward this year. We'll see if that will serve the purpose. But before I do jump into the unreserved cash management report, I wanted to introduce Jessica Halverson. Just raise your hand. Jessica works in the finance section, and you get to see a lot of the finance team on project activities. And so I asked Jessica if she would come down and show her face to you all and the good work that she does. She does a lot of work inside of the loan program. And in particular, you do see her work in the director's report. And I wanted to use that to highlight a couple things looking backwards. In the director's report, Lauren Miramon is our accountant that manages the contracts. And what was interesting, and you probably heard me at the last board meeting, last year we did $55 million in new loans, which is a high number. Traditionally, we're about averaging 40. Coincidentally, of the 328 loans in repayment, so we're processing an annual payment from 328 borrowers, that revenue was 55 million. So 55 was approved last year and 55 came in loan repayments. Also in the director's report, some of the work that Jessica and the team is involved with, shows the projects that were substantially completed. And so the process, the board approves, we go out and we disperse the money throughout, could be a 5-year project. We substantially complete the project, put them into repayment, and last year we substantially completed 15 projects at $32 million. So that whole system, just throwing out the big numbers as we go through the process. And the project managers are working on $400 million worth of projects, and there are 50 of them that are in that process of dispersing funds. So to the cash balance or the cash management report, a lot of zeros because we did just start off the year. The first page is the severance tax page that I think really has something that I just wanted to share with the board. We're still struggling with severance tax revenues and where those will end from last year. We've actually received more money than we believe we will ultimately have. So we're still evolving as to what that start number in severance tax will be. A reminder, that's the fund that $45.5 million went out the door to help the general fund budget a year and a half or so ago. And so you're seeing some red numbers on that page. Those will start coming back out of negative during the course of this year. We are projected to be able to make about $50 million in new loans this year, primarily because the construction fund received the $33 million back in Tabor emergency money that was taken this last fiscal year. So that brought us to where we can, I guess, publicly say we will be back to normal business this year. Again, normally about $40 million in new loans. We never know how big or how often loans will come in until they do. So with that said, unless you have questions, I'll move off the microphone.
Director Brown?
I just have one question, and I apologize for not knowing it off the top of my head, but the 11.5 in severance tax revenue with the June projection, how much less? Can you give me like a comparison? We'll pick a year. How much less is that?
So I use an average. I've given up on following the bounce. And so
We've all seen the PowerPoint, yeah. Giving up on that.
I've succumbed to a 5-year average. And the number that I use is $30 million on average. And that's for the last 5 years, taking into account the less than zero this year, possibly. I also consider looking forward the next couple of years of projections that are provided to us. So I use 8 years, some of the past, some of the future, and the number I'm using is 25. So 11 is lower than normal, but it's certainly better than zero, which is what we could be seeing from last year once the receipts and refunds are returned. Okay. So one of the things I failed to mention, we will be talking at the September Finance Committee in more detail about how this looks future years out and also the non-reimbursable investments that go in the project still. So we'll probably have a lengthy discussion on those numbers that'll include that conversation about severance taxes.
Thanks for that explanation, Director Schwartz.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. And since we have a captive audience with Dr. Gibbs here, what is the future funding source for water projects? We know where predictably the oil and gas industry and severance revenues are going to go. Are we thinking that there might be another opportunity for investing in our water resources long term?
Severance tax is extremely hard to, if I had a crystal ball, it'd be amazing for the whole DNR, not just UBCB. But, it's all market driven. We have about the same amount of active wells that we've had the last few years, about 54,000. And so, again, just depending on what the global price markets look like, have a huge deterrent on what we see for severance tax. Now, a lot of people have asked me, hey, the current administration has a moratorium on oil and gas activity on federal lands. Colorado is very different from some of the other states where New Mexico, for their oil and gas activity, they actually have 87% is on federal lands. Colorado, we have 3% is crude, 17% is natural gas in Colorado. So we're a little insulated, I would say, from those federal actions. But again, it just fluctuates, we just we kind of bump along this, not knowing what, next year will look like, or so. Wish I had a better answer for you, but we have no idea what the prices will look like.
Any other questions? Dr. Anderson?
I certainly sympathize with you. I don't understand the oil business and why they just completely shut down when the price gets to a certain point. It makes no sense. I mean, and then you pay for the expense of shutting down, and then when the price comes back up, you pay for getting oil again. It makes no sense to me. My question's not related to that, but Kurt, this doesn't include any of the gambling tax. Do you have a sense for what we might see from sports betting?
I probably should defer to Anna. She will be talking later about some of the operational budget issues, and I'm guessing she would be able to address that. So I guess we've heard some preliminary numbers on that, so she'll probably share that in her presentation. Okay. But this does not include any property.
Any other questions? Thank you, Kurt. Let's move on to agenda item 9, change to an existing loan. Rachel. Hello.
Rachel Pittenger, CWCB staff, the record. I will be presenting agenda item 9, which is the Chambers Reservoir Liner Rehabilitation Project for Arapahoe County Water and Wastewater Authority, commonly referred to as AQUA. If I slip up and say AQUA, just to shorten the name there. Sure, sorry, sorry. Let's see, project is in Division 1 South Platte Basin. The original loan amount is $2,525,000. We're here today for a loan increase of $1,515,000, which brings the total loan amount to $4,040,000. The loan terms will remain the same as the original approval, which is 20 years at 1.90%. And I've been working with Kevin McBrien and then Steve Witter, who are the managers and the key people in charge of this project. Matt Behill actually joins us today with Kevin, and he's the finance director. So to remind everyone, just a real quick overview of the borrower. AQUA was incorporated in 1988. They have an 8 square mile service area. They serve approximately 10,000 residents, which includes commercial and residential and industrial customers. 4,767 taps. The goals of this project: stop excessive leakage, maintain ability to fill the reservoir to capacity, and continue raw water irrigation service. So the 3 photos here are kind of what I see as the 3 major parts to the project. The first is the clay liner removal. The second would be the new liner install. And then the third is why we're here today, is the pump installation with the existing pump house. And I do have a quick video, if we could play the video of the project as is today.
Thank you.
I just have a quick question. It's the question we always ask when we see the weak financial ratio. scoring on the cash reserves and current expenses, as well as the water bill. It's obvious that this function is different than your average water utility. And so I gather that that came into your process and brings staff comfort going forward with that weak designation. Do you have anything you want to add on that? And you don't have to go into detail.
I think for now I'll add that, and we can follow up too. We're also going to just keep the collateral the same. They've maintained, they've paid off some of that debt, and so this loan increase actually replaces that. The high water rate is very influenced by the commercial and industrial users. So I think we have some numbers kind of split apart that we can talk to in a moment of kind of the breakdown of the residential fee versus the commercial fee versus the industrial, if that would help.
I mean, personally, I think you've answered the question. I just want to make sure that we address it and, you know, give you the opportunity to just say a little bit more so that, you know, we're tackling that what looks like a low score, but, you know, on paper, it does look like it works out fine. So thank you for the conversation on it.
And it looks like we've got the video queued up. If you'll want to play that.
There's no sound. So this is the hard work to date. There's still one more portion to go, and that is the installation of those pumps that will allow variable pressure, variable flow control for delivery of irrigation water. The schedule for pump installation in that pump house is by January of 2022. Again, I mentioned the collateral will remain the same as previously, which was a pledge of revenues. So with that, I'd be happy to take any additional questions and invite Governor Matt to answer any questions you might have to.
First, are there any questions for staff? Director Schwartz?
Maybe the applicants just had a question about the structure.
Any other questions for CWCD staff? All right. Thank you for joining us today. Please state your, come on up and please.
You got a special seat up there.
Yeah.
This is
And,
wonderful. Thanks for inviting us.
and please state your name for the record.
Yes, I'm Kevin McBrien. I'm Senior Project Manager at Aqua.
Madam Chair, my question is, so you had to remove the clay liner and then put in the other liner? I don't understand why you couldn't have just applied that on top. That's just a dumb reservoir question.
No, it's not a dumb question. It's caused us a lot of concern over the years. Back in 2013, we started filling the reservoir. The total reservoir on the original design was 80 feet deep. We were getting up to 55 feet deep, and we were losing as much water as we were putting in. So that just was not sustainable for us. Did a lot of investigations. We drained the reservoir. When we drained the reservoir by pumping out, this reservoir is filled by pumping from alluvial wells and withdrawn by pumping. When we drew it down, which was less than 25% of the recommended removal rate, we had a failure on the slope. It turns out the slope was not constructed with 8 feet of clay liner the way it should have been. It had about 2 to 3 feet. And the groundwater pressure on the outside just caused failure to the slope in the southwest corner. And at that point, that's when we had to relook at everything. And going through, we were considering lining it with clay, but the import material was going to be extreme.
And after doing multiple testing around the side slope, it was characterized as a colander. It should be a bathtub. So that's not very good. So that's when we made the decision to go with the liner, with the geosynthetic liner, but we had to remove the clay liner. So we did not change the overall capacity of the reservoir. We just scraped the side slopes down. We created a slope from the south end to the north end and then installed the liner. Fury Construction was the contractor, did a great job. Raven was the geosynthetic liner material, and they work great together. In fact, we did get the CCA award for small reservoirs this year. So. Sure. I could go on and on.
Well, thank you for being here. I did want to give you the opportunity if there's anything else you'd like to share with the board for our consideration.
Rachel, working with Rachel has been a pleasure, and she's asked us a lot of questions to make sure this was as complete. She understands your process. To understand why we're going for the loan amendment, this was always part of the project. It just was never completed until we resolved, and we had different engineering and different contractors involved. That's why this amendment is come about, because we did bid the project out. I think it was stated in there. We did get 6 bids, which was great. We got 4 within about a $300,000 range, which shows that the plans actually are in pretty good shape. We went with RN Civil, and yeah, I mean, we're just looking forward. Our plan is to have this fully operational next summer, next irrigation season. So we wanted it this year, but things take a lot longer than they should.
Yeah.
So.
Well, thank you for that clarification, and thank you again for being here. Are there any additional questions? And if not, we need a motion.
I would move staff recommendation for agenda item 9.
Second.
Thank you. It's been staff recommendation on agenda item 9 has been moved by Director Sakata and seconded by Director Belt. Is there any further deliberation by the board before we proceed to vote? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? And just get Director Hawkins. Director Hawkins, did you want to vote on this item, or did you?
Director Brody, I had raised a question. Is it too late for that? Do I need to just vote?
Why don't you go ahead and ask the question? Apologies for not seeing you ring in.
I had flagged for Rachel that the staff recommendation that was in the board pack was just a bit confusing, and I could not see the staff recommendation that was up. Were there any changes made? I thought it was a little confusing as to whether the increase was roughly 4 million or whether it was 1.5.
Thank you, Director Hawkins. May I propose a change that might provide a bit more clarification to maybe the first line of the staff recommendation? To read, staff recommends the board approve a loan increase not to exceed a total loan amount of $4,040,000 and continues. Does that help provide clarification? To provide a total loan amount right before that 4 million?
Director Hawkins, does that address your question?
That does, and I was just raising that I found the staff recommendation a bit confusing. I realize we have a pending motion on the table, so please let me know if I should vote or if we're going to do amendments.
Okay.
Do you want to ask whoever moved for the vote if they want to amend the motion or if they want to keep the motion as well?
Director Sakata, I believe.
I would be willing to amend my motion.
Okay.
To include the new staff recommendation.
And we need a second on the amended motion.
I will second. the motion.
Okay, the amended motion has been moved by Director Sakata and seconded by Director Phelps. So we will proceed to vote on the amended motion with that tweak to the staff recommendation. Before we vote, is there any further discussion of the amended motion? And seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And I'll note for the record that Director Hawkins has indicated that she is an aye vote as well. Anyone opposed or abstaining? Seeing none, staff recommendation is approved. Thank you again.
We would take the 4 million.
All right, moving on to agenda item 10, loan delinquency action. Kirk.
Good morning again, Kirk Russell, Finance Section Chief. This is a non-action item. Agenda item number 10 is the loan delinquency action on the Two Rivers Water and Farming, Two Rivers F2 Inc. Project, and wanted to provide an update. Oh, before I do that, we may have Attorney General's represented online as well. The folks in the Attorney General's office that I'm dealing with are Deanna Westfall and Allison Robinette and Jen Neely. And over the course of the last year and opening up this to look at all the details that need to be taken care of, the attorneys unearthed a need to go deeper and solidify the notification of the borrower. So, and they referred to it as the corporate research revealed mergers and name changes and who should be notified in that the promissory note. And so to go back in time, and certainly this was somewhat disheartening on our part, when we were looking for the borrower, we actually were reaching out to the Attorney General's office who was dealing with them on the Kacharis Dam effort. We felt fortunate we found the individual to be communicating with, and it turns out there was a lot more work that needed to be done. And so on July 9th, we noticed, I think Jessica Halverson was helping us do this. I think we noticed 11 different individual addresses and names. They're all kind of unique in this very complicated corporate organization. And so anyway, that started the 30-day clock on the foreclosure effort. And so we now officially are in this window. We send them by certified mail and regular mail. And so one thing that changes, obviously there's timing of things, but one thing it does change is it does provide this borrower an opportunity to cure the loan. Almost resets us back to when we said you pay or we're going to call the entire note due. So we kind of shifted back in time a fair bit. So, but anyway, officially we're on the clock. And again, this effort, the attorneys were pushing us to make this as clean as we can to avoid it being contested when we do get to that point. So, but the 30-day clock is on. And then once, if that does, if we reach the 30 days and we have not received the 161,000-ish that they are in default with, which is 2 payments and a late fee, then I understand that there's still a lot of work that goes on. There's all the borrowers must be personally served. And there are, I think they counted over 100 other defendants that CWCB must make reasonable efforts to contact. One of them is in Switzerland, I think. And so there is a lot of work ahead of us in this effort. So with all that said, Director Ryan commented on the Kacharis Dam. That was a good day when we received the funding for the repayment into the emergency fund. The construction fund does so much for folks in Colorado and in the water community. And one of the things this board has the ability to do is step in and help when dam safety issues are there. And so I think that total number was about 730,000. The latest, I think, cured that entire 730. So that is back in our opportunity to use it for other good things. So that is a good thing. And it's somewhat indirectly connected to Two Rivers. It's very, as you can imagine, very complicated how that whole thing works out, but it's still that's good news. And with that, I think I'll We'll be open for questions and look to Jen Mealy if I need some support.
Thank you. Thank you for that update. Director Brown, did you have a question? Yes, please.
So in your memo, unclear, is the cure deadline 30 days from July 9th? Or can you just tell us what the deadline is or is-ish?
I think it is an ish.
Okay.
I think it's been made clear to me that it's, again, giving the opportunity to cure.
Yep.
And we have received the certificates back that they did receive it, I believe, on the 12th of July. So if that's the 30-day date, the attorneys, I think there's some reason there. And I have had some communications with the borrower, and they still want us to believe that there is money coming our way.
Checks in the mail.
Checks in the mail, hopefully. So we look forward to that. I would love, and our goal here is just get the money back. And if this serves that purpose, then I'm happy about it.
Any other questions? Director Trick.
Kurt, I thank you for your presentation on this and your work. And I want to thank everybody from the AGs that worked really hard to get that money back from the dam safety issue. That's certainly a win. So I want to commend everybody that was involved in that effort, because it was a worry for us that we would get that repaid. So thank you. And just keep on the grindstone on this. I hope we don't have to talk about it again in September, but certainly understand that there are complications. So just wanted to make that comment.
Director Short.
And thank you, Madam Chair. With regard to obviously pursuing this action, I guess I would ask, I'm hoping at the same time, because this has been such a shell game, so inappropriate, I'm wondering if that is another avenue that, or recourse, the Attorney General's office is looking at in terms of defrauding the state.
And if you'd rather just
Not say that, but you can, but it was just a suggestion.
I'll take it as a suggestion.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Director Trick.
I did have one more question or comment, I suppose, and maybe this is just something to think about or contemplate. Is there something we need to clean up in our process that would require us to be notified of mergers, acquisitions, anything for our loan borrowers?
I certainly will take that under advisement. I think there's better ways for us to handle this particular borrower. We've talked in the past about, our systems are very effective in 99% of the situations, but I think there certainly are ways that we can do better. And so we will continue to do that. We constantly look at that. But yes, the answer is yes.
Thank you. And why don't we move on to agenda item 11, Colorado River.
Good morning, Michelle Garrison, CD staff, for the record, presenting agenda item 11, Colorado River update.
Michelle, if you could just speak up.
Okay.
Thank
sorry,
you.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just get, it just takes a minute.
And I apologize, as Becky said, this agenda item may run a little over the short time we originally gave it, to talk a little more about some of the drought response activities. So
Understood.
we'll do our best to keep it as short as we can. Colorado River updates.